morning, class. It is Science with Mrs. Finch. Today we are going to learn about pond ecosystems and all the things that live in a pond and what makes a pond healthy. So we're going to start with two things. One is living organisms and non-living organisms. So let's first explain what organisms mean. Organisms is what helps life. So it could be something that produces life, or it could be something that is just a material for life, like dirt. Here is an example of a non-living organism. We have water and soil. We need water to survive. Ponds need water to survive, and soil as well. Now, the living organisms are the things that are in the pond, like plants and animals that either produce or consume other animals. Now we're going to talk about those big words today because those are probably very new words to you. So we're going to look at this chart right over here. All right, so get down here so you can see better. There we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about, the basic things that make up a pond. You have to have a food chain. So a food chain is important because without one or the other, that pond won't survive. So we're going to start with our producers. So producers is just a big word that means they prepare foods for the consumers and create oxygen so animals can breathe. Okay, so some of these examples are going to be phytoplankton. Wow, that is such a big word. So we are going to look at that word and break that down. So phytoplankton are microscopic. That means they're really, really small that you can't see them with your own eyes. You need a microscope to see them. And that is something I will show you later on. With my microscope, you are going to be able to look at the phytoplankton as well as some bacteria. The other thing that is a producer is algae. That's that green stuff that you may see on top of a pond. Then we have our submerged and our floating plants. So under a pond, what you don't see is that there are some grasses and there are some other kinds of life that live under there that provide oxygen to the living parts of the pond, like our fish. Okay, so let's look at consumers. So again, big word. I know I keep giving you these big words, but you know what? You can handle it. You are so smart. Look at this. Consumers. That means they get their energy from eating producers. So that is insects, frogs, fish, and birds. So if we didn't have these, what would these guys eat? Nothing. And if these guys didn't have producers, they would end up dying. So it's important that we have producers and consumers in our food chain. Now, the last thing we have to have in this food chain to make our pond ecosystem healthy are decomposers, another big word. So, decomposers just means that they consume or eat dead plants and dead animals. So, those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about, like the fungi and the bacteria. Those are the things I'm going to show you under the microscope that you can see that slowly break down material or animals that have died in the pond, and they keep that ecosystem going. Again, without all of these, we would not have a healthy pond. So today my son went fishing at my neighbor's, and he did practice social distancing, so proud of him. And he went fishing at the neighbor's pond, who happens to be a pond expert. And he has a beautiful pond, and he caught these two little sunfish. So in a little bit, I'm going to show you the sunfish, and then we are going to go ahead and take them down to my pond and release them because we need to get some more fish in our pond to make it a little healthier. All right. So what we're looking at here before we go down to the pond is my eldest daughter's turtle habitat. So we talked about some basic needs that living organisms must have to survive. So this turtle has shelter, It has water, of course. It's got plants, and of course it has some food. So this turtle has everything it needs to survive in this little ecosystem. And then later you are going to make your own ecosystem in your own backyard. So Thomas caught these two sunfish right over here in our little tank. Now you see how there's a little bubbler here creating bubbles? One of the things that any kind of pond needs is fresh oxygen. Okay, because oxygen is important to fish, just like it's important for us to survive. And so if we did not pump this oxygen into this tank of water, these fish would eventually die. They are not getting enough to breathe. Okay, so right now, that's pretty much all they have. They have shelter and they have some oxygen, of course, the water that they're used to living in, but I don't see anything for them to eat. So we're going to need to take them to our pond and release them so that they can go ahead and get big and grow and be bigger fish for us to catch. Here we are at my pond. My son sees a turtle way over there in the distance. We have our willow trees. This provides shelter for animals. Let's look real close at the water here. All sorts of things growing and floating on top. Little flies. So we are going to release the two fish that my son caught this morning. And then I'm going to take a drop of this pond water and put it under a microscope for you to look at, okay? And we're going to see what kind of little critters we see in there. So, Thomas, you want to go ahead and release them? And there they go. All right, so I'm going to pause this and get my sample, and then I will show you a picture of what is in our water here at our pond. See you in a bit. Okay, so what you're going to see in this slide of the drop of water from our pond are the bacteria, the phytoplankton, and then you're going to see something called a copiopod. You'll see them moving around. That copiopod is very similar to the plankton you would find in the ocean, but it is a copiopod, and that's the name it's given when they are found in a pond. Our field trip, you just took a trip down to my pond. Now my pond is fairly young. I don't have much growing in it or living in it. I do have plants underneath. I do have trees around it, and I have water trees like willow trees. I don't have a lot of algae in my pond. So that's something that still needs to grow and develop to make my pond a little healthier. Now, one thing that my pond does have that tells me it is doing the right thing and developing the right way is that it has frogs. There are flies and little insects going over the water and inside the water. That's telling me that it is doing the right thing. It's getting what it needs. And then we released two very young fish into the pond to help that grow better. Now, the last thing that we got to see was the bacteria, and we also got to see that copiopod. Now, when we looked at that in my microscope, that copiopod, it is another word for plankton. And remember when we talked about the phytoplankton? Well, phytoplankton are really small, and you learned a little bit about aquatic life, water life, about the ocean this week in your reading. And we also got to see some of Miss Tarrant's art on that. And what we find is that some of these fish, that's what they need to eat to grow bigger. And just like in our pond, we have certain animals that eat these copepods. That's pretty neat, I think. I think that shows that we are having some good signs in my pond. We are making a healthy pond. So the last thing you got to see, which was not a pond, was my daughter's turtle habitat. Now, my daughter's turtle habitat had to have certain things to make it a healthy ecosystem. We had to have water, we had to have air, the turtle has to have shelter, and it has to have food. So it needs these four basic things to survive. And as you saw, that turtle had everything it needed. So what you are going to do today is you are going to build your own pond ecosystem. You will need an adult for this, and you can either draw a picture of an ecosystem, or you can do this project with me, and I will show you how we are going to make a pond ecosystem in our backyard or front yard, depending on what your parents want to do. And all you need is just a tote. It could be, this is kind of a medium-sized tote. You can have a smaller one, like a shoebox size. And we are going to dig a hole, and we are going to put this down into the ground, and we are going to create the ecosystem that we just learned all about, making sure that we have our producers, our consumers, and our decomposers. So that means we're going to need some water plants. So I did not go down the pond and pick water plants. So I happen to have some willow trees that I am growing, and I think I'm going to use some of those to help with our producers. We're going to put those in our pond, our little man-made pond, and find some water grass and stick that in there as well, and maybe some tadpoles, and then those will develop into frogs, and the birds may come around. So we're going to have all this part. We're going to have the producers that are going to make the oxygen for our pond. We're going to have the consumers that are going to eat or also breathe that oxygen. They're going to eat the food, the plants, and the bugs. And then they're going to have things that go down to the bottom of the pond that break down, and those are the decomposers, okay? You have to have that. I know it's yucky when you go in a pond and it's kind of slimy down there, but that is very important to the health of your pond. So over time, your little pond that you're going to make is going to grow and develop and become a healthy habitat. So let's go ahead and make that pond. See you in a little bit. Hi class, so I found a spot in my backyard where I'm going to make our outdoor pond. So it's near a tree, dug my hole, and I got my bucket. I have some water plants. I have a bucket of water, and I have some gravel. Now I know it's windy, so I will try to speak a little louder. We're going to stick our bucket right inside here, and then we're going to get a little dirty. We are going to put some non-living organism, our dirt. Now, some non-living organisms also that are in ponds are rocks. So I have a little pea gravel and I got some bigger rocks in here. I'm going to spread that around as well. And you know what? If there are a few leaves in there, that's okay. You need that kind of material for a healthy ecosystem in your pond. So now I'm going to fill up the sides with everything that I dug up. So I'm just going to tear up this grass. Make sure I put all my dirt in the corners here, just like this. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so I filled up around the edge, and then I thought, you know what, to make it look a little more natural, I'm going to put some old stones that are just hanging around my property. Now, when making a pond in your backyard, and if you have little kiddos, you may want to put this somewhere they can't get to, because even though it's just a little water, it could be a hazard. So you have to make sure that you put it somewhere that your parents felt it was a safe spot. And then my last stone. And then you can always just fill in between it with the dirt and some grass. All right, so I have a water lily, and I have a willow. Now, do you see that in our pots, they have little holes? This is made for water plants. Now, if you don't have, you can just move some dirt around inside the bottom of your pond, stick it in there, make sure it's secure, and that'll work just fine. So I'm gonna grab my big bucket of water. This is another non-living part of our pond. Now, it being Oklahoma dirt, it is going to be a little red to start with. There we go. So now we have our non-living, our dirt and our water, and then we put in some living organisms. We have the water lily, and then we have our willow tree. Now, the way we're going to get tadpoles in here, there are two ways we can do it. I can go down on my pond and go get some, or I can wait for birds to come on by and get a drink of water. Now, how does that happen? Well, tadpoles, when frogs, lay their eggs, sometimes those birds get those little eggs on their legs, and when they fly around and they come to another water source like this, they drop those eggs inside here, and then we'll end up with tadpoles. So this is a great ecosystem to make in your own backyard. If you want to do this, awesome. If not, you can make me a picture and send it to me at my email, finchm@tecumseh.k12.ok.us. I really look forward to seeing all those projects that you've been working on, and let me know what you think of our pond ecosystem. Till next time.